Hello, welcome to Productions MJC. Today I would like to talk about something near and dear to my heart, some other people that are reacting like flat earthers. They prompted this gentleman, they being sovereign citizens, asking questions. Their questions, well, they prompted Steve Leto to do an informational, educational video on the legality of who owns your car. This gentleman is an attorney, so he should know about the subject. And he does have a lot of videos that I watch and enjoy, and he does know a lot, and things that I never even thought of or understood, but he does know about his industry. As happens, though, we're all human. We make a mistake, we misspeak, we don't know what we're talking about, and he usually knows far more about stuff than anybody else. He's an attorney. But he fails to explain the simple premise of ownership correctly. And I see why he's doing it, because these sovereign citizens who coming in and saying, you know, deregister your car, unregister your car so the state doesn't own it, and, you know, stuff like that so you can drive around. And that's just silly. The government owns everything. And simply untitling it, deregistering it, you know, stuff isn't going to help. The government owns everything. Let me explain what I'm talking about. So who owns your car? That's one of the things he talks about in his video. And he answers some questions for folks, but he misses the whole point that nobody owns anything. One of the points he brings up is you can sell your car, and if the government owned it, it would be illegal for you to sell it because they own it. So nobody can sell your car but you. He goes into an explanation of things, and in the comments somebody brings up the point, no, you don't own it, the government owns it. No matter what you do, the government, and he tries to explain away the fact that you don't own it. Well, he misses the point. If you miss your lease payment on a condo, what happens? Well, that lease can be sold to somebody else, and you can be kicked out. Well, the government calls that lease payment property taxes, income taxes, licensing fees, whatever. But it's an annual lease payment. That's all it is. It's not that bad. I mean, on my car, it's like $300 a year. You know, it's less than $30 a month. But it's a lease payment. Because if I miss that lease payment, they will hold what's called a sheriff's auction, and they will sell my stuff. Going back to what Mr. Leto says, how can they sell my stuff if they don't own it? He's the one that brought up the point in his video. You can't sell it if you don't own it. Well, the government holds the sheriff's auction, and I'll tell you what, they don't just sell. Let's say you miss the property tax on your land. You pay everything else, car, you know, they can still come in and do a sheriff's auction, and with that sheriff's auction, they can sell the furniture in your house, the TV, the land, the outbuildings, everything, because they own it. And for people in certain areas, they know the fact the government owns everything, because it is a criminal offense to collect rainwater. Now, if the government says they own, and they don't just say, you know, it's for this or that, they say rainwater is their property and you're stealing it, and they charge you with a criminal offense, you know, theft. Well, if they own rainwater, what don't they own? But yeah, there's many places where it's against the law to, what is it, collect, gather, and store rainwater. It is a criminal offense because it's theft. So the government owns everything, and they always have. It goes back to the feudal system. In the feudal system, the king owned everything. The king gave out parcels of land to the lords, the knights, some peasants. Peasants were allowed to use the land. But did the king relinquish ownership of it? No, never. Never once was ownership of the land relinquished. Usage of it was allowed. But, and some people mistakenly think that peasants were given land and they owned it. No, they actually owned the right to use it and owned the right to pass that usage on to their kids and stuff. But at any time, the true owner of the land, the king, could come in at any time, swoop in and say, that's mine, goodbye. You know, and there you go. Just like government can do to you. I have a parking strip out in front of my house. If I don't maintain that the way that the government wants me to, if I were to cement it or put blocks, or I have to get their permission if I was to dig up the grass and to xeriscape it. You know, if I was to put anything other than grass that they want there, I have to ask their permission to plant a tree, and it has to be the kind of tree they want there. I can't just plant any tree I want. I think no fruit trees, no, I mean, it, you know, but because it's their property, the parking strip is theirs, right? But I have to water it, I have to mow the grass, I have to keep the weeds down, and if I don't, I will be charged with criminal nuisance. If I don't. And that goes for my entire property. From the road, I have to scrape my own sidewalks. Not just because if somebody slips and falls, they get sued. The city would get sued. So the city, if I don't scrape their sidewalks and maintain my sidewalk in front of my house, which is their property, they will charge me with, you know, fine me and charge me with criminal nuisance because I'm not maintaining their stuff and they might get sued. Now, I thought the Constitution of the United States said something about involuntary servitude, but if I don't maintain their property and if I don't pay for the fuel to mow the lawn, if I don't take the time to mow the lawn, and I can't bill them for this. Keep in mind, I'm not talking about an HOA or some other thing like that. It's just a regular house on a regular street of a regular city. It's not some special subdivision. It is not some, what do they call them, covenant, building covenant arrangement. Not an HOA, just a street, a house, and it's supposedly mine. But if I don't trim the trees the way they want me to, then I will be charged with criminal nuisance, and they will take my stuff away and sell it and kick me out. That's just the way it is. And it goes to my whole property. If I don't trim my trees the way they like, if I let weeds grow that they don't like, so they can come in and take my stuff away from me and kick me out and charge me with a crime. Government owns everything. Government owns every single thing. Here's another example. These buildings are called temples, and they're from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, derogatorily called Mormons for forever. They were kicked out of the United States of America. They fled west and came to Mexican territory, and they built these buildings. They built their own stuff. They built dams. They made the desert flower as a rose, as the saying goes. Then the United States government came in and claimed ownership of of everything, and brought the church almost to its knees, to poverty, because of all the taxes and fees and stuff they were assessing them. And yet they had acquired the land from Mexico. They because they had went outside the Louisiana Purchase that they got from France. They were in Mexico, technically. Mexican territory. The government just walked in and says, yeah, we own that. And you have to pay us this amount of money. And they tried to destroy the church, but I digress. But really, what happened to drive them out? Well, it was this dude, Boggs. Missouri Executive Order 44, called the Extermination Order. And it was perfectly legal up until 1976. In 1975, if you had have followed the instructions given in this order, then you would be perfectly legal to drive the Mormon. You know, you could go up to a member of this church and you could either exterminate them or drive them from the state, and it would be perfectly legal under this executive order, written by the governor of the state of Missouri. When was it, 1838? Yeah, 1838. It would have been perfectly legal. It's not legal now, so don't get any ideas. But, well, actually, on June 1st of 1976, if you had have tarred and feathered and driven a member of this church from the state or executed them, you would be following the directive of this law. That's how, you know, they call it a law. It's, you know, the statute, code, whatever. That's how sick things are, that it would have been perfectly legal. Well, to go back to Mr. Leto's point, who owns this car? The government owns the car. If you miss your lease payment on that car, your AKA taxes, you know, what happens? They come and they take your stuff, they sell it, they take their money off the top. You know, there's nothing you can do because they own it. You are just leasing it from, and when he says no, you don't, they can put on a lien because of taxes and stuff. When you purchase a home, okay, let's just look at that example, and you have a mortgage on it, who owns it? Everybody says, well, the bank owns it. You're just, well, you're kind of co-owners in it. But ultimately, if you don't pay the bank, what can the bank do? They can kick you out of it, and they can sell it to somebody else who will make the lease payments on it. And eventually, though, the lease payments with a bank will go away. With the government, they never go away. It's lease for life. You cannot get away from never paying them again. A bank only wants so much money, and then they quit. They stretch it out over 30, now 40 years. But still, eventually somewhere it will go away. And you can sell the house. You're not really selling the house. You're selling the right to lease it from the government. The same way you would sell the lease to a condo. The same way you would sell a timeshare to somebody else. You can sell a timeshare. You don't really own that property, do you? No, technically you really don't. But you sell a usage right to somebody else, and they're willing to pay it. I mean, technically, if you wanted to, if somebody said they want to sell the home, you could go to the government and, you know, and you could just tell them, I'll tell you what, whatever you say the taxes are, I'll double them. Just give me that house. The government could go in and seize it and say, well, I've had a better offer, there you go. It'd be a hard fight, but the way our statutes and codes are written, it looks like that could be done. That you could barter with the government to get a piece of property. It's been done. And some people say, well, you're giving legal advice that you shouldn't. It's actually been done. Where the government comes in and they seize it by eminent domain, and they give it to somebody else. They give it to a contractor who's building a mall or building a highway or building. The government comes in and they take your property away from you and they give it to somebody else because the other person's offered them a better price. I'm not advising anybody to go and do that. What I'm saying is historically there has already been a precedent set. It's been done. I mean, anybody who lives in California knows that California has come in and just seized blocks after blocks of property to build a road on and given the people next to nothing. Because they can. Because ultimately, the government owns it and they just lease it out. And sometimes, yes, they lease it out to the highest bidder. That just happens. So, while I'm not advising you to do that, I'm just saying it. Apparently it's legal because they've done it before. I mean, come on. If the government can turn around and put out an order that makes it legal to kill somebody just because they're a member of a certain church, and it's legal for, what was that, 100 and, how many years was that legal? Almost 140, 138 years. Wasn't it? Yeah. That was legal for 138 years. You could do that. And ultimately, the people who live in areas like Salt Lake County, Salt Lake, Utah, the government doesn't even play around. They just plain out say, we own rainwater, and if you collect it, you're stealing it from us. They don't even play around with saying, oh, environmental damage, or they just flat out say, the water falling from the sky belongs to the government, and you can't take it from the government, and if you do, you will be charged with a crime. So there you go. If they own water falling from the sky, what don't they own? I mean, think about the United States. The United States government. If they kick somebody out, that'd be like, say I had a renter, and I kicked the renter out and they got in their car and drove off, and I kick them out of their car and sell it to somebody else. Could I do that? The government of the United States of America kicked this church out of the United States of America, and they fled west to Mexican territory. And then the government came in years later. How many was it? Like 20? 40? I don't know. I'd have to look it up. But they came in and they just said, all those buildings you built, thanks, they're ours. The government owns everything. And if you're a bleeding heart, sovereign citizen or whatever, and you say God owns it, you know what? I can't argue with you, but you know what the government's going to say? Well, when God shows up and has proof of ownership, then we'll talk. But until then, government owns it. And there's nothing you can do. It's a sad situation. But it's true. Government owns anything, so... anything, everything. Government owns everything, so... darn it. Just, you got to get over it and just learn to play the game and live with it. Because they own buildings that were built on land that was part of another government. What? They own water falling out of the sky? Well, I would dearly love for somebody this summer to sue the city if rain happens to wash away their topsoil or destroy their land, or a storm knocks a tree down. You watch how fast the city denies ownership of water falling from the sky. I mean, can you imagine the city getting sued for hail damage to vehicles? Oh, that'd be awesome. Somebody who lives in one of these areas, come on, somebody's got to take up the banner. Somebody's got to try this. The next time there's hail damage in Kansas, if Kansas has one of those laws that says the rainwater's theirs, say, okay, baby, fork it over. Put up or shut up. Oh, man. Oh, but I digress. Let's get back to the main subject, of course. People can't own anything. It's always rented or leased from the government. Thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. This has been Productions MJC.